Welcome, everyone. Glad you could join us for our latest webinar in the run-up to the Sustainable Foods Conference next January. We are delighted to be talking about a subject that is core to the program next year, and that's on ingredients and product reformulation. For those of you who've never joined one of our webinars before, first of all, welcome. And second of all, this is, as I said, as part of the Sustainable Foods Conference, which convenes the leaders of industry to discuss future food systems. And we have a key executive lineup, which I'm going to share with you guys very quickly before we kick on and I introduce Ali to the panel. As you can see, we've got the CEO of Tesco, Morrison's, Co-op Food, Green Yard, and a whole array of other speakers joining us. So please do take a look at the conference if you're interested in joining. And then tomorrow I'll be providing a summary email of the webinar findings alongside a code to join, as well as any other further information on the event. So thank you all again for joining. Enough about me. Over to you, Ali, who's going to be taking us through the journey of the next 55 minutes on ingredients and reformulation for future food systems. Lastly, for everyone who's watching, please do pose as many questions as you can within the Q&A box. We'll be posing them to all our wonderful speakers throughout the next 55 minutes. So thank you all. Over to you, Ali.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. It's a bit strange being on the webinar because we know that you're there, but we can't see you. So as Jawed said, please do post your questions in the chat. We're looking out for those as we motor through the webinar. I think we've got a really exciting discussion and panel today. So in a second, I'm going to ask the panel to each introduce themselves and tell us where they're dialing in from, because we've got a diverse range of geographies with us on the call today. So just before we do that, for anybody who hasn't met me, I'm Ali. I'm a registered public health nutritionist, and I'm also co-founder of Planetary Alliance. And I will be speaking at the Sustainable Foods Conference in January, so I hope to see lots of you there. So before we get cracking on our questions, let's just go round the room. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us all where you're dialing in from?
Thanks, Ali. I'm Anna Pierce. I'm Tate & Lyle's Director of Sustainability. I'm based in the US, in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. Tate & Lyle is a food and beverage ingredient solutions provider.
Thanks so much, Anna. Welcome. Lauren, please introduce yourself and tell us where you're calling from.
Thanks, Ali. So hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Woodley. I'm the head of nutrition and sensory science at Nomad Foods, which is Europe's leading frozen food company. And I'm dialing in today from Surrey, just outside of London.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lauren. And last of all, but not least, Neve.
Hi everyone, I'm Neve Brannelly, Head of Nutrition for Danone UK and Ireland. Danone is a global food company.
And where are you calling us from, Neve, today?
I'm actually calling from Dublin. So
Dublin?
Yes, based in Dublin.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. Okay, so we've got a really exciting discussion looking at the intersection of health and sustainability. And clearly ingredients are a really key part of that, as is reformulation. So we're going to dive in with a first question relating to the intersection of human and planetary health. And specifically, we're going to look at how those two divergent topics have become a key business issue together. So Anna, I'm going to come to you first and reflect on kind of the last 5 years and the progress that I think all of us can agree we've made in the food system on joining up health and sustainability. I would love to know from you, Anna, what has really helped you drive that shift internally at Tate & Lyle?
I think there's two key things, Ali. The first driver of change is the business had itself a purpose. And part of the pillars of the purpose were caring for our planet. So sustainability became front and center in the way that Tate & Lyle operates our business, grows our business, and thinks about innovation. So immediately there was a priority placed on sustainability that hadn't been there before. So when you start to talk about innovation and meeting customer expectations, naturally those priority topics like sustainability start to fold their way into the conversations from the Tate & Lyle team. At the same time, as a food and beverage ingredient solutions provider, we're providing solutions to consumer-facing brands. And in doing that, those brands and those CPGs are coming to us not only to say, we want a healthier product with the same functionality that we've had before and that consumers have grown to love, but we also want it with a lower footprint. We want it to have less of an environmental impact. We want more resiliency in the supply chain. And the answers to that became sustainability. So I think there was this natural progression of us collectively thinking about, if we're going to innovate, why wouldn't we innovate the product to be better from the whole perspective of the product rather than just solve one discrete issue? And I think that that's where we've seen the most success.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Anna. And I love that narrative that you're giving us about the purpose really being at the heart of the business. So turning to you then, Lauren, thinking about this concept of purpose, I know that in October we've got a really key global moment in the food system. There's the publication of Eat Lancet 2. And I know that Eat Lancet 1 for Nomad Foods really did help sharpen the purpose. I'm wondering, Lauren, whether you could give us some of your key reflections on that, how that moment helped shape your approach on nutrition and sustainability, and maybe some of the opportunities that that drove across the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So our purpose is around making mealtimes better through the goodness of frozen food. And the concept of better and goodness, although my background, I'm a nutritionist, actually, they're much broader. It also links to sustainability as well. So the first iteration of Eat Lancet was incredibly influential on our innovation strategy, our renovation strategy, our marketing, and also the core ambitions that sit behind our major segments. So as a business, fish and vegetables are both absolutely key for us, and both of them feature in Eat Lancet 1, as obviously they're relatively important. So first, for fish, we decided to take on board what the Eat Lancet recommendation was. We created an ambition of trying to help Europe to eat 2 portions of sustainably caught fish a week. And we were a co-founder of MSC years ago, so kind of sustainable fish has been within our DNA for a number of years. We then looked at our entire profile through a lens of both nutrition density and also environmental footprint, because different species of fish will have a different balance of both nutrition versus sustainability. So we looked to see where we could do reformulation, where we could diversify our species. And we also looked to see how we could try and drive a transition from red meat into blue foods by creating new products. So for example, creating kind of natural fish burgers as a replacement for a steak burger or something like that. Veg is really my passion area. In veg, we really kind of took on board Eat Lancet. So within Eat Lancet 1, there was a great recommendation that we need at least 300 grams of vegetables a day. And Eat Lancet was, I feel, the first time that we had a very overt recommendation around the colours of different vegetables. And we really then translated that not only into our product strategy, but also marketing. So we did a big campaign around eating in full colour is a healthy thing to do. So kind of a consumer articulation of phytonutrient science, which obviously wouldn't be massively consumer friendly. So Eat Lancet really helped to, I guess, influence all of the different elements of our commercial and R&D strategies. And we're already thinking about how Eat Lancet 2 may affect us. So really looking forward to the 2nd of October when the publication comes through. We're already talking internally about how can we bring more pulses and beans into our portfolio? How might that affect reformulation? But also we have a nutrition segmentation internally, which helps us with our development activities. And we're looking at how we can bring in more granularity. So for example, if we have a meal which contains red meat, that then should be an occasional food, and therefore it's treated slightly differently from a development point of view. So we try to pull Eat Lancet and the learnings from that really into the DNA of our segments, our development, and also our marketing.
Incredible, Lauren. I love hearing that story. So Niamh, coming to you on this topic then, Lauren's just kind of talked through the Nomad Foods strategy, particularly around plant-based as well as blue foods. For you, Niamh, plant-based foods are often seen as both a nutrition and sustainability opportunity, but not always. So I'm wondering whether you could maybe talk to us more about how you're balancing that across your portfolios. And I'm particularly thinking about the approach to plant-based milks, for example.
Yeah. So to start with, health and sustainability are intrinsically interlinked. So we rely on nature for the ingredients we need to make health-focused products. And we consider both then hand in hand. So to make these products, we have to have looking at the whole view on health and sustainability. Hence why nutrition and sustainability are key pillars within our impact journey in Danone. So we really look at when we're making a product, what does the impact of that product have on both health and sustainability? So we look at that each part of the way. So we had already done quite great work on Alpro. So today, across the Alpro range, we offer low carbon options for shoppers. So they're today, but we wanted to bring our sustainability sort of ambition a bit further. So this year, proud to sort of talk a little bit about the move from it's a very popular, our oat-based Alpro drink, which was already very popular, doing very well, but we wanted to go one step further and look at what could we do to really, I suppose, move the goalposts. And we're sourcing all our oats from the UK. So originally we would be on a European recipe with the rest of the world and have our oats coming from Europe. So we now are 100% British oats, which is fantastic. So as a result of that, it allowed us to, and I'll talk a bit about the nutrition part of it, but to have quite a significant impact in terms of our carbon footprint. So we were able to reduce the carbon footprint by 25% by doing this. I didn't mention there, we changed one of the production processes as well, which also helped not just localizing where we have our oats sourced, but also the production process in the factory, which also then allowed us to use less than 20% of, so we're reducing our land usage, and also 70% reduction in the amount of water we were using across the sort of life cycle of the product. So, and that compares to, I mean, it equates to quite a significant impact on Alpro's carbon footprint. So it's 6,000 ton reduction in Alpro's carbon footprint. So quite a significant impact there. So that's the sustainability angle. By localizing the recipe, we were reliant before this on the European recipe. So we didn't have much in terms of what we could do to make the recipe more bespoke for the UK population. And in Danone, we'll talk a bit further about how we do it, but we really look at the data out there to see, okay, what are the key nutrient deficiencies in the UK population? So by having I suppose, the power to do it locally, we could adapt the recipe to ensure that we fortify the key nutrients needed for the UK population. So we updated the recipe to have it's low fat, it's high in fiber, and we fortified with calcium, vitamin D, iodine, which is a key nutrient, which is actually lacking. And that was flagged this year in the National Diet and Nutrition Survey. 47% of childbearing women are not getting this nutrient, and that's key to support sort of a successful pregnancy. It's very important in pregnancy. So we've also added that in there as well alongside vitamin D. So a successful story overall from a sustainability point of view and nutritionally by making that move with British Oats.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Niamh. I bet all the nutritionists in the audience are nodding their heads at the mention of iodine. So very well done on that. Okay, so let's move on then and think a little bit about the innovation journey. And I guess for me, like, sustainability and health are often great kind of guiding stars, but they don't just happen overnight. So Niamh, you've just given us a really great example of the whole supply chain moving in order to deliver on those agenda points. Anna, I'm going to come to you and say, you know, you've done really well on embedding sustainability across your innovation in the business. What are the kind of practical steps or the tools that you've used to do that maybe the audience can take away into their own job roles?
I think for us, one of the drivers of the discussion was a bit of a tension point initially, in that Tate & Lyle has science-based targets approved by the Science Based Target Initiative on a 1.5 trajectory by 2028. So when we're thinking about all of our decarbonization pathways for Scope 1 and 2 and Scope 3, you can have a really great decarbonization strategy. And if your innovation strategy is not keeping sustainability in mind, you're essentially throwing the problem that innovation can create in terms of increased energy use, increased water use, longer supply chains, longer transportation in Scope 3 over the fence to the operations team to address in the CapEx type of investments that we see in decarbonization. So there came this point where our leaders looked at each other and said, we either have to do this collectively or we're not going to achieve these targets, because one function is undercutting the progress of other functions to achieve what is a critical target for us. And I think as a company, you have to have that moment of realization within functional leaders. They have to work together with sustainability to achieve these targets. It's just like any other target, right? We all work together towards those financial goals. If you don't, you're not going to hit your targets. So I think that tension point, frankly, helped a lot. I also think that there's a moment where the more we work and embed sustainability expertise within our functions, you kind of see that light bulb moment when members of the team are saying, well, wait a minute, I think we could eliminate a drying cycle. I think we could upgrade this equipment. And it's not just deep ideas and thoughts that are coming from the sustainability team or our engineers. It's coming from the functions within the company. And once they have a project where they make progress, it doesn't have to be significant progress. A little bit of progress, that's that kind of inspiration spark that they suddenly say like, "Oh, I get this. Now I know what we're trying to do. I can go do this on this other product line. I can think about that for a new product that we're working to introduce." And I think it takes a little bit of practice. That initial road and those conversations get bumpy because you're upskilling entire organizations that years ago never thought about sustainability. They
Yeah.
thought about quality and meeting customer needs. They thought about price. They thought about schedules. And now all of a sudden there's this new element. And until you really get some experience with it, it can feel very daunting. Um,
Mm.
and I think we've had some nice products. Our Claria G line reduced energy consumption by 35% and water use by 34. That came from our innovation team looking at that product line and saying, we could do this a little bit differently. We think, let's go try it out. And it just takes a little bit of coaching to get there. So I would say don't be discouraged if that first idea doesn't hit the ground running and isn't this immediate overnight success. It's that incremental getting everyone on board and familiar with the process that really, I think, is a game changer in the long run.
That's so brilliant, Anna. Thank you. And I think it's really interesting about how light bulb moments for sustainability can come from functions completely outside of the sustainability team. That's such a great insight. Thank you for sharing it. So, Lauren, thinking then about how sustainability gets done in organizations. I know that Nomad has a really strong focus on governance as part of this. And I'm wondering whether you can talk to us about how the governance structure at Nomad or the responsibilities helps you in terms of getting things done on health and sustainability, and also how it enables you to make sure that health and sustainability are incorporated in every innovation decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, actually, with Anna's point, I think is I really agree with that. It's interesting. I think so many people have joined our business over the last years because they've bought into the sustainability and health ambitions we've got, and some fantastic ideas, especially for people who work in slightly different functions. They might approach challenges very differently. So I think it's fantastic that it needs to become part of the DNA of a business. So from a governance point of view, I'm incredibly pro-governance. I think governance is a game changer for really just making sure that operationally a business all kind of runs towards the same golden thread. So first off, we have nutrition, ingredient and sustainability parameters built into our technical briefs up front for any product. These parameters are effectively a way that we operationalize what's in our policies and our commitments. So they're going to be kind of tick box KPIs to make sure that we have full adherence to all policies and commitments. So that goes up front to the technical brief. Then for any project which goes through, so whether that's innovation, reformulation, even just rollouts, we have multiple stage gates. So each project has to go through 3 gates to kind of progress to launch. And at the first 2 gates, which are the gates where actually there's still going to be potentially development work, which is where obviously from a sustainability and health point of view, you can really have a big impact. For both of those gates, the same nutrition, ingredient and sustainability parameters are present within the governance structure. So every single one of those boxes has to be RAG rated depending on where the project is at that point. If anything is not compliant, the project must be rejected. It then gets escalated and redevelopment can happen. And I think the power really comes in the need for escalation and also redevelopment, because it allows you to reassess projects and see what's really possible. And for example, I'll use a health example, but last year 100% of our launches across the business were non-HFSS as a result of this governance structure, because everything was rejected that didn't meet that. And it's incredible what can be redeveloped back if you if you have that kind of governance process in place.
That's really helpful, Lauren. And just one follow-up question for anybody who doesn't work maybe in industry. Can you just talk a little bit how you as the nutritionist might work with the sustainability team in determining those gates?
Absolutely, yes. So within Nomad Foods, the health team, the nutrition team work very, very closely with sustainability. So we work across one strategy. So we have what we call our appetite for a better world, which is around better sourcing, better operations, and better nutrition. So we sat down together at the very beginning of this strategy to work out what would be the commitments, how do they map against the SDGs. We then assessed these commitments and worked out from a product project lens which ones would we need to tick, or which ones are going to be fundamental in how we build our future portfolio to actually deliver that overall strategy. So effectively, we've kind of challenged each other, looked to see how can we operationalize it from a very long old policy into one box with a sentence against it. And actually, I think the power in myself kind of working with our sustainability team, but my sustainability team also working with me too, is that we can help to challenge each other on simplifying. Because I think when it comes to health and sustainability, if you work in it, it feels very simple. Well, not always simple, but you understand it. It feels understandable, and that's really not the case for so many colleagues. So trying to simplify down what's being asked and make it as simple as possible to meet, but also to communicate if you're not meeting it. That's a really key part of any sort of governance procedure.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lauren. So Niamh, I want to pick up now on the kind of thread of fortification, and particularly what the standards are across your business on fortification as one of the really important parts of product development and innovation. So I guess you talked a little bit about kind of population health and making sure that you were addressing the core needs in the population. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how any of those safeguards that you're putting in place, like fortification, are embedded as part of your innovation journey?
Of course, it's interesting, Lauren, to hear how Nomad Food operates, because it's actually quite a similar process in Danone. So we have very strict KPIs, really looking from the ideation phase as to what product we're going to make. We're deciding already what we're going to add there, and it won't move through different stages of development unless there's a possibility to add fortification. So it's very similar, so good to hear that. In Danone, our whole mission is to bring health through food to as many people as possible. So our big focus is on putting in positive nutrition where possible in the products. And since plant-based milks aren't naturally rich in key nutrients, we feel it's a responsibility to add them back in there. So that's why we have strict KPIs for nutrition across plant dairy, across the full business, and we work very closely with sustainability teams as well on KPIs that sort of are with a similar type of thread of our ambition. Fortification in Danone is never treated as an afterthought. It's really sort of from the start, when we're going to make a product, what we're going to add in there based on sort of the needs of the population, but also what kind of messages we're going to put out there in terms of benefits, and how we're going to communicate them to consumers in a simple way. So it's embedded at every stage of our sort of innovation journey. And it's something that's quite core, because in Danone, we have products actually, we just happy to announce, produced our first plant-based kids yogurt this year. So we have then a set of different nutrition KPIs set for sort of kids yogurts, because they're going to be different needs versus adults. So we have KPIs set for the yogurts, for kids, for adults, but also across our full plant-based drinks. And this year and next year, you'll see we have a leaf on our Alpro packs, which really gives a signpost as to that we have fortification in there, and signpost to consumers to have a look at the back to see sort of, that it's in there and why it's in there. So the answer to your question there, it's embedded across the full business. And in Danone, you wouldn't get a product on shelf unless it meets the fortification standards.
Brilliant. Thank you, Niamh. Sounds like there's loads of consistency there between the approach that you're taking and the approach of Lauren at Danone as well.
Yeah.
That's great. I can see loads of questions coming into the chat, so please keep posting them. We are going to have plenty of time. We just got a couple more questions to get through before we come to the audience. Okay, so we've talked quite a bit about the interlinkages between health and sustainability. I guess I just want to pick up a little bit more, particularly Niamh, thinking through fortification, on what's working in practice. So we've talked quite a lot about the kind of innovation journey and the theory behind how products get developed. the part that we haven't spoken about is how that is then translated to the customer, to citizens, to the public. And I would love to know from you, Niamh, when it comes to things like fortification, what lessons have you learned about translating that message to the public in a way that resonates with them and really helps them understand the importance of that across products and portfolios?
So when we look at fortification, we start with, again, I think not to repeat what I've said, you start with the need. So you don't add something in that's not needed. But certainly in plant-based, there's a rationale to add in already because these key nutrients don't exist. But you need to make sure you're not under fortifying or over fortifying. So you make sure there's a need, and you also identify which product is the best fit. So it has to have some underlying good nutrition there before you sort of, you wouldn't be adding into things that maybe perhaps are HFSS that you want to encourage more consumption of, something underlying with good nutrition. So choosing the right products, and then sort of within the business really track progress for fortification. And we've moved, say, ahead with an innovation where we feel we've done a good job with fortification, but we also go back into Danone to sort of look at the core range and see, okay, how can we adapt, renovate to add more nutrients in there? So that's sort of what we do in terms of our process. But for communication, that is a bit tricky. So we have to be careful how we communicate fortification because it can be perceived as negative. We've added something in. A consumer turns it around and thinks, wait a minute, there's more than 3 ingredients. What does this mean? So what we've tried to do is have very transparent, very clear messaging around the benefits of the key nutrients we add in there. On pack, I mentioned we have sort of a leaf and some clear explanation on the back as to what the benefits, why we've put that in there. But we also work with experts in the field of plant-based nutrition, and we try where we can to get a credible message out. More with that, they'd have a health background out to the public. We'd have articles written and various things shared to really inform the public that fortification is a positive thing and not a negative thing in products. So it's really adding in positive nutrition. And actually, I was in the UK yesterday, and I was meeting with a lead retailer in the UK, a big one. And retailers also have an ambition to be healthy. So they really want to know what's going into the product, why it's going into the product, and they really like the idea that you're adding something in that's actually beneficial for the population because it's a need. So they want to understand if you're bringing out a new product and you're adding something in and you're talking about it as a benefit, they really want to get on board to find out what that is, and in store find ways to communicate that clearly to consumers, which helps a lot because if you have a clear message on pack, on your ads on TV, on social media, and then it's in the retail setting and it's sort of haloing the same message in a way that's simple for consumers, I think that works very well because we have some campaigns, and when they get the retailers on board and really brings it to life, I think it can help resonate more clearly with consumers because they can really see, okay, the product's there, and they're also seeing the messaging in store. So that's our approach in Danone.
Very good. I love that. So I think just the thread on communication is really important as both the kind of internal business tool as well as the external translation.
Yeah.
So Anna, just thinking about how that importance of communication might be used internally. I loved what you were saying earlier about there's only one option, right, for the business to move in the right direction. And essentially that is kind of a communications job that you're doing to keep everybody on that journey and aligned to the plan. Can you share any really practical tips or examples for the audience on how you've managed to keep that narrative consistent and how you're using it internally to bring everybody along the journey?
I think there's a couple ways to get at it. So part of it is exactly what we've been discussing today. It's embedding sustainability checkpoints into key processes. So there's the communication of what the expectations are. There's a moment where functional leaders and engage with that topic, and that's kind of their on the job training, if you will. So what I've found isn't incredibly effective is this very broad communication to the entire company. These are our goals. This is what we're doing. We want you to do your part. Thank you so much. And the functions go back and say, what are they talking about? It's one more thing to do and I don't really understand it. And by the way, I'm in finance, I'm in engineering, I'm a plant manager. This means nothing to me. What I have found is effective is when you can relate it to their specific job function. So our goal at Tate & Lyle is that every employee in their role can understand how their role impacts their function, their physical manufacturing location, and then how that ladders up to Tate and Lyle's goals and how that ladders up to the greater societal need and some of our UN SDGs. You should be able to understand for every single key purpose pillar in our company, what am I doing in my role to support Tate and Lyle's advancement and achievement of their goals? And what does that actually mean for the world? I think you have to drive that purpose down through the organization. And part of that is that hands-on learning. It's that I need to innovate this. I need to cut emissions by 10%. How am I doing that? And when you start to get that engagement with the project, that's where you're really educating members of our team in a way that's meaningful to their deliverables and their specific role. And I think that that's the most effective way, is to really drive that engagement. And if you miss that step, much like we talked about today, there's checks and balances in our CapEx investment process, in the innovation process. What's the sustainability impact? What are the reductions? How does this impact our targets? And if that step hasn't been thought through, they get sent back, right? Go back, re-engage, understand the impact. If it's not in the right direction, let's try to work through that, understand why, understand what we can do. And that process is kind of the end catch versus I'm doing this to make sure I can check that box, right? It's we don't have projects that are coming with gaps in the process. They wouldn't be up for review. So I think just relying on that review to drive functions to support some of our targets and goals, there's a real missed opportunity to really make sure that they connect back with, why am I doing this in the first place and why is this important? So that's what we try to focus on.
Yeah, that's so brilliant. And I think the concept of hands-on learning is something that many of us have just like gravitated to over time. So Lauren, just thinking about hands-on learning, I know that there's all sorts of tricks of the trade, should we call them, in nutrition, with the tools that we use as a way to galvanize people on a roadmap for better health and sustainability. So maybe reflecting on some of those tools. So we've got front of pack nutrition labels, reformulation, ingredient selection, to name a few. I know that those will be levers familiar to you. Do you think you can talk to us about which, if any of those things from your perspective, might have been most influential in driving the outcomes that we want in health and sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting one because it's probably going to be a very frustrating answer, but my view is that actually it's a combination of levers.
Okay.
I would say just generally that often there's a kind of view to try and look for the simplest solution, kind of putting everything on one outcome, on kind of the one magic bullet that's going to fix everything. And unfortunately, I don't think that's the case for health. I don't think that's the case for healthy, sustainable diets or the sustainability transition as well. I think what we have found is that actually it's the combination of different levers and different levers that actually affect different parts of the business as well. So if we think about reformulation, that's something which our R&D team can look at. Our ingredient selection is something that our R&D as well as our procurement and supply chain would look after. Then we look at responsible marketing, which is also another lever of health promotion, and that's something that's owned by marketing. So I think different levers across different parts of the organization are actually the most beneficial way. In terms possibly of being the big step change that I can think of, so I've been at Nomad for 9 years. 8 years ago, we introduced business disclosure. So we started voluntarily reporting. And I'm a huge advocate of business transparency because I think transparency is probably the most effective behavior change tool from a commercial lens that I've seen. Since we started reporting annually, the proportion of healthy sales had a commitment in place and annually reported against that commitment. That really galvanized action across the entire business to deliver. And because of the commitment, that then led to the reformulation, the innovation, the responsible marketing. So I think in terms of kind of the big step change piece, it was that transparency that really drove it.
Really nice. Niamh, is there anything that you would add to that from a Danone perspective on either kind of practical tools or disclosures that have worked really well across the business?
Similar to what Lauren has done in Nomad Foods, I think transparency is the biggest thing and really making the messages very simple for everyone to take on board. I think once you have a simple message and a simple, consistent thread, I think people can really follow. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Okay, so we've still got time to add more questions in the chat if people are thinking of questions. I know that I've got quite a few. We're going to move now from kind of where we've been on health and sustainability, the journey and all the great examples that you've talked about, to looking ahead. So before we move into the Q&A, I guess I'm really keen to hear from you about where you want to get to, or where your business wants to get to on the journey in health and sustainability. Niamh, I'm going to come back to you and say, in terms of plant-based innovation, which is clearly ramping up and helping companies meet ambitious sustainability targets, is there anything that you would like to flag on the kind of role of innovation around plant-based, or the expectations of where you want to take it in the next 5 years as you continue on the journey to meet those punchy targets on sustainability?
Yeah, so from a nutrition perspective, plant-based is really allowing us to offer more choice, support health and dietary patterns, so people that want different products in the population. From a sustainability perspective, it has a positive impact on the environment. But we also see that there is a role for possibly a hybrid solution, where we have some animal protein also with the addition of plant. And that's something that we've done quite successfully in the medical side of our business, which is known as Nutricia, where we have healthcare solutions for more medicalized nutrition solutions, which we have tube feeds for various different conditions. And there we've mixed a hybrid, so we have plant and we have animal protein together. And these solutions are they're clinically showing the same efficacy in patient outcomes as your sort of fully animal-based animal-based protein. So we see a move towards this direction of having a mix of both, and that's working very well. And so it's something to innovate, and we look and see whether we can do something like that across maybe the healthcare range of Danone, or in our Alpro range, whether that's something that we could do, or we have other dairy products. So it's some innovations that we're looking to pilot and see if consumers find them interesting.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Niamh. So Lauren, thinking about next 5 years then, Niamh's just talked about innovation and hybrid products, etc. You spoke earlier about aligning the business with the kind of external agenda in healthy, sustainable diets. What do you think, from your perspective, are the kind of big opportunities to drive health and sustainability? And just building on that as well, where do you think, because you've spoken so well about governance, where will that support you on your transition pathways?
So I think there's really two big opportunities that I see. I think the first one is an effective way of communicating the value of healthy, sustainable diets and articulating why that needs to be the guiding star for our business through all different levels of the organization, from the people kind of doing the work at bench all the way up to our board. So I think articulating that message, and obviously contextualizing that message for the different audiences so that it makes sense to them, but also it motivates them. I think that's going to be a real unlocker. The other big thing that actually for the next 5 years, it's a bit broader than just Nomad Foods. I think just for the general food system, I do think that what we're going to need to see, or what the best opportunity that we have, would be well thought out and properly implemented regulation. I know it's not always a very, very popular view, but I do believe that well thought out and properly implemented regulation that's really rooted in science, nutrition and also sustainability science, that really levels the playing field for our industry and drives this collective action, that's what's going to reshape the food system to become healthier and more sustainable. And 3 of the areas which I think are going to potentially have a huge unlocker, if there is well thought out regulation, would be this mandatory business disclosure, mandatory front of pack nutrition labelling, and also specifically for the UK, we're a European business, so this doesn't exist elsewhere in Europe, but where we have restrictions in place, making sure that they're properly implemented. I think it's incredibly important. So I don't think that there will be adequate acceleration to deliver healthier and sustainable food systems without regulation, would be my view.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lauren. And I guess there's probably lots of people on the webinar who might not be kind of familiar with policy and regulation. So perhaps could you just spend a couple of minutes kind of reflecting on HFSS, the journey that we've been on in HFSS, and what that's meant for you as a business and the kind of behaviours that it's enabled you to drive?
Absolutely. So HFSS, high fat, salt, sugar, is a set of regulations that were first announced back in 2020 under the Boris Johnson government, and it's based on the 2004-2005 nutrient profiling model. And it was announced back in 2020 when there was a big shift to look at how we can reshape the food system and the food environments in the UK to become less obesogenic. We've had some ups and downs over the last 5 years. Originally, restrictions on placement promotion were meant to come in 2022. Eventually, we're going to have the final batch of restrictions coming in October of this year, so next month. And then we will be having advertising restrictions coming into place on the 1st of January, although we should be voluntarily complying with them as of next month as well. So the purpose of these restrictions were to make it so that a consumer or a citizen would need to seek out HFSS products. There'd be less bombardment, and therefore the idea is that it should reshape consumption habits. However, it's had a very patchy implementation thus far. It has a limited application to only the 13 categories which contribute the most calories and sugar into children's diets. And I think it's fair to say that there hasn't been adequate enforcement or training and resource to deliver that enforcement as well. So it's a policy area which could have been very impactful, where there has been some good compliance within the industry, but actually it's a good example of why really thinking through how you're going to enforce regulation is absolutely key to its success.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Lauren. Anna, is there anything, I guess, just building on this theme of policy change and kind of leveling the playing field, is there anything from a US perspective that you would add to the picture that Lauren's just painted from the UK about how regulation might be driving behaviours?
I think from a US perspective, we're at a time of political uncertainty that leads itself into, I think, several functions, and fundamentally is disrupting the way that companies do business. That said, as we and as our customers continue about our days, right? Growing our businesses, thinking through innovation and the way that we operate, I have not seen a slowdown in focusing on sustainability, in focusing on sustainable innovations, despite all that we're seeing in the political climates and uncertainty and pushing back of CSRD. There's still, if you look at the Science-Based Target Initiative report on companies making climate targets, it continues to increase. So while we're seeing an albeit slowdown, the real measures of companies making commitments and setting targets isn't slowing down. I think, one of the questions by one of the attendees today was talking about, and during times of constrained budgets or deprioritization, what are we doing with these programs, these nice to have programs? I think the signals that we're seeing in the space is these programs may be perceived as nice to have programs, but more and more are table stakes in companies really having the resiliency within their supply chains and their operations, that when we see a flattening out of the climates that we're in now in terms of politics and reporting and requirements, the companies that continue that steady progress and working towards their goal are certainly going to be those that are standing to benefit financially and from their position in the marketplace versus those that said, sustainability is not so important right now. We're not investing in that. I think some projects, when you talk about decarbonization, when you talk about reformulation, they have really nice ROIs. It's not just about we're going to innovate this product. We're going to make this product better from a manufacturing standpoint, a supply chain standpoint. We're going to think about what end consumers, how they're impacted by these changes and reformulations in products. And when you aim to make something better, you do see those decreased costs and impacts and nice ROIs on these projects, as we're talking about what is, I think, historically was seen as a cost function. Sustainability is certainly something that is here to stay. I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift in the sentiment that it is a differentiator versus if you don't have the programs, the LCAs, the product carbon footprints, a real solid program with results, you're out, right? Out of that RFI process. You're out of the reformulation discussions because it just doesn't align to our customers' agendas. And I think that's a real shift that 5 years ago, if you had a really solid program, customers were saying, "Oh, that's nice. Let's hear about that." Now it's very much expected that you do. So I would say, despite the tough conversations and the unrest in politics and reporting requirements and things kind of feeling like they're slipping, all indicators are it's steady stream ahead. Maybe a bit slower, but everyone needs to continue the pace to really be competitive in the future and achieve the ambitions that we all have.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Anna. And I love that line, sustainability is here to stay, here. So we're going to turn our attention to the question. There's lots of questions. So in a second, we're going to head over there. So I guess just to kind of wrap up then on the key themes. Number one, sustainability is here to stay. Let's put that top of the list. The other kind of key discussion points that I think we've covered today, which have been really fascinating, are one, the integration between health and sustainability is possible, and also that it's happening. I think you've all given us some really brilliant examples at a product level of where that's literally being delivered day to day across portfolios. That's brilliant. Second theme that I've drawn out from what you were talking about was the kind of the movement from ambition to delivery. So it's really great to hear you speak about governance, Lauren, and Niamh about the portfolio development around fortification, etc., and how those ambitions have really translated into real life delivery. I think that's a brilliant takeaway. And then I guess the third point is around the value in aligning businesses with these topics, right? Not just from the external world and the customer and the citizen perspective, but also for us as individuals working in the food system. Aligning our teams around health and sustainability allows us to move forward together. I'm going to turn over to the questions. I think Jawad's posted lots of questions in here, so I'm going to do my best to take us through these in the last 10 minutes. Anna, there's a question here that I think maybe you can help us out with around tightening budgets. So we've talked about the fact that sustainability is here to stay. One of our audience members is saying, how do you deal with tightening budgets across businesses and move sustainability from nice to have to business critical, even at a time when budgets are really squeezed and stretched? Is there anything else that you can add to what you've already talked about on that?
I think that companies that don't have sustainability set as a priority are going to struggle in during this time period, right? As things are slowing down, if it's not a priority, it's very easy to see that slip and say, we're going to get to that later. We're going to use these funds and reallocate them to something that's viewed as more critical. So I think the first step in that is really ensuring that you understand where sustainability is in your company's priorities. And if it's not the top priority, I think there's moments where data can really be your friend. How many of your customers have sustainability targets? What does that revenue stream look like to your company? Maybe it's not significant, and then that's a different problem. Oftentimes it is. So I think putting on that commercial lens and really thinking about how sustainability impacts the customers, impacts the consumers, and what does it mean to your company if they don't, is the discussion that we want to start to have. And there's really great ideas for projects. Some have nice ROIs, some don't. I think obviously we all want to start with the projects that are low-hanging fruit. And then you get to the place where you're having some of those tougher discussions. And as time marches on and we see ETS moving faster in Europe, and we see some of those timelines coming into play, some of the projects that weren't attractive 5 years ago, dusting them off and saying, in today's place and space, this might be very appropriate, or there's new technology to help along the way to make some of those financial discussions a little bit easier, particularly in companies where it's not a priority.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Lauren or Niamh, do you have anything else to add to that in terms of kind of tightening budgets, what that might mean for sustainability and health plans in the organisation, and how you manage to keep your topics on the agenda at a time when there's lots of cost pressures?
Yes, I mean, I could give an opinion. I talk a lot about, especially from a health perspective, that health is an unlocker to long-term commercial growth. It's not a strangler, and it's a long-term investment, but it will have a good ROI in the end. I think there are some good data points. I think also shocks that we've seen from the likes of GLP-1s has helped to show that actually there is a long-term sustainability to investing in health. But I think really trying to link these subjects to the commercial reality of the business and the future commercials beyond the kind of month-to-month or quarter-to-quarter realities, that's been where I've kind of found the biggest impact.
Brilliant, thank you. Niamh, anything to add on how to keep your topics front and centre when budgets are squeezed?
Health and sustainability are the core of Danone, so there is no negotiation. So we just have to find the budget. So if something else is dropped, but health and sustainability are always kept at the forefront, and that's across the world of Danone. So we don't actually have a bargaining of that one at all. So that has to stay front of mind, Danone. So yeah, budgets, we find the budget. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, next question. This is a great one. So David Moore would like to know, what's the view of the panel on improving nutritional and environmental labelling, and in particular the work of the FDTP? Will this be a business tool, or could it move the dial with the consumer to support in more sustainable foods? So Lauren, I'm going to come to you first for a view on the FDTP, and then Niamh, maybe you can give a couple of reflections as well if you have any reflections on nutrition sustainability integration. Over to you, Lauren.
Absolutely. So it's a great question. So I think first, probably thinking about the labelling side of that question, I think there's still a lot of question marks around both nutrition and environmental labelling. So from a nutrition labelling perspective, a drive for harmonisation in Europe through farm to fork hasn't been successful, and it's unlikely we're going to ever reach a harmonised tool. In the UK, we're still awaiting outcomes of consultations from half a decade ago. And then when we look at environmental labelling, there is still obviously raging discussions around cradle to gate, cradle to grave, average data, specific data. So I think there's still some kind of kinks to iron out. I do see there being a really great opportunity with digital labelling in the future, and I know it's something that's being looked at by governments to see how the digital label might enable certain consumers who are a bit more engaged with this subject to get the information they need to make kind of more sustainable and healthy choices. On the reporting side, so I was a member, well, I'm a member, it's on hold at the moment, but of the Food Data Transparency Partnership Health Working Group. And I think it's really clear that, as I mentioned earlier, reporting is a tool. It drives behaviour changes. It really pushes businesses to use all the levers that are available to them to drive healthier and more sustainable portfolios and activities as well. I think what's been interesting from a sustainability data point of view has been the EUDR and CSRD. It's raised the question of what's an acceptable reporting burden. And I think that's a question that still needs to be properly discussed. So I really do hope that the Food Data Transparency Partnership will resume in some form soon. It was paused back in 2024, just before the general elections. We're still awaiting to hear what's going to happen. I think just generally, though, reporting and businesses having adequate data, I think that is absolutely the future. We can see in markets, for example, in France, where Yuka has a huge presence and has significant impact on consumer behaviour, that actually within these food information apps, there is a need for accurate data, because regularly the data is just not accurate, it's out of date. So having accurate data into these food apps will ensure that consumers are at least making informed decisions if they choose to use an app to drive their decision making. So sorry, quite a long-winded answer, but I do think there are good opportunities, but some big questions and tensions that I think need to be ironed out in appropriate forums to find a way forward for both labelling and reporting.
Agreed. And we haven't even touched on the topic of kind of AI and what that might mean as well for access to data, but also the interface between how that data is translated to the public, which is a whole other kind of worms. Niamh, is there anything else from your perspective that you'd like to add on kind of nutrition and environmental reporting, or what the opportunities are around that from your perspective?
Like Lauren, I'm also a member of that group. I mean, the working group has been paused, but we fully support it. I think it's a very positive move to make data transparent to consumers. They can really make an informed choice of what they're, and it leads to less confusion of what they're buying. And it also, I think, by making it more transparent, it's a sort of a level playing field for the whole of industry. To know we really strive on health, sustainability. I think, and we really try to push forward to really achieve, I suppose, top on both. But I think if it's not made transparent, I think we can still drive forward and do what we're doing. But I think if other companies don't move, forward with that, then it's sort of, without having sort of a focus on it, it means that nothing changes. So making data available, I think it really will help to bring the full industry on board and make it a level playing field, but also give the consumer a choice, an informed choice, and they feel confident in what they're buying. So I really, I think it's a very positive move.
Amazing. Thank you. I think we've got lots of consensus on that topic across the panel. Thank you so much. Anna, I'm going to ask you now to respond to a question on innovation to reduce the risk of deforestation in supply chain. So we haven't really talked about that today, but the question is, what are your thoughts on innovation to help reduce the risk of deforestation, particularly when it comes to high risk ingredients? I wonder if you could give us your reflections on that.
I think in light of EUDR coming to effect at the end of this year and the SBTI flag target around deforestation, primary linked commodities, this topic is a topic of debate. The reality is you have to think about what you don't want in your supply chain. So that's the first thing. Where you can eliminate and reformulate, absolutely you should do that. There's the reality though, consumers like chocolate, they like coffee. Palm oil's in some ingredients that are in everyone's kitchens. So there's not a moment where we can reformulate ourselves out of these supply chains. And when you think about these supply chains, there's this whole community impact. You're talking also about people's livelihoods. So I think the one thing that EUDR and SBTI are doing is it's forcing the conversation of what can we reformulate? What maybe functions similarly and has a similar taste that consumers would want to consume. But then I think there's this other conversation about if we align our supply chain and our procurement principles to AFI and we're actually building resiliency in the supply chains and working with farming communities, you can bring everyone up to the standard by which we should be holding ourselves. And I think that's a longer, tougher conversation to have than just take out the eraser and say we're not going to have cocoa in our products anymore. That's just not realistic. So there is this moment where we have to really engage to try to drive the change that we want to see. Some are easier than others. We all know that. There's going to be moments where companies think they're great, and then they find there's a non-compliance, and you address it just like any other non-compliance. I think it's not striving for perfection, but that continued progress, and really hearing the communities along the supply chains and understanding what the real risks are for each particular supply chain and ingredient.
Brilliant. That's such a good note to end on. Thank you all so much. You've been fantastic panelists. And Jawed, thank you for inviting us here today. Hope to see lots of you in January in London. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. That was great. See you soon.
See you.
Take
Thanks
care.
so much.
Bye.
Bye.